It was the morning of my 68th Thanksgiving, and the turkey was already in the oven at my son-in-law's place when I heard my daughter say my name in a way that made my stomach drop. She didn't know I was standing in the hallway. She thought I was still in the living room watching the game with her husband's father. But I'd gotten up to find my jacket. The temperature in that house was always 5 degrees colder than anywhere reasonable, and I'd stopped just outside the kitchen door when I heard her voice drop to that particular register, the one she only used when she didn't want me to hear. "Just go now," she said. "I'll keep him here. Go to the house and do it before he figures out what's happening." A pause. Then my son-in-law's voice, low and careful. "You're sure he left the spare key under the mat?" "I put it there last week," she said. "Just go." I stood there with my hands still on the wall and my jacket half on one arm. The oven fan was running. The football game was murmuring down the hall, and everything I thought I understood about my family quietly rearranged itself into something I didn't recognize. My name is Francis. I'm 68 years old. I spent 31 years as a civil engineer with the city of Winnipeg, raised 2 kids in the same house my wife and I bought in 1989, and I have never in my life considered myself a particularly suspicious man. My wife Carolyn used to say I trusted people past the point of common sense. She wasn't wrong. But Carolyn passed 4 years ago, and since then I'd been on my own in that house. The house my daughter had apparently just handed a key to her husband so he could enter without my knowledge on Thanksgiving afternoon. I didn't say anything. I put my jacket on, both arms this time, and walked back to the living room and sat back down next to her husband's father, a retired pharmacist named George who talked about hockey, the some men talk about religion. I sat there for 45 minutes watching him explain the Winnipeg Jets' defensive shortcomings while my mind went somewhere else entirely. My daughter came in 3 times to check on me. Each time she brought something, a drink, a bowl of chips, a question about whether I needed anything. She was performing. I could see it clearly now, in a way I couldn't have an hour before. The way she kept her phone face down on the counter. The way she laughed a little too easily at things that weren't funny. She was running out the clock. I excused myself to use the washroom and instead stood in the hallway and called my neighbor, a retired RCMP officer named Pete, who lived 2 doors down and had a key to my house for exactly this kind of situation. Not this exact situation, of course, but emergencies. I kept my voice low. "Pete," I said, "I need you to go by my house and tell me what you see." He didn't ask questions. That's the thing about Pete. 22 years in federal law enforcement teaches you not to ask questions on the phone. He called me back in 11 minutes. "There's a silver Audi in your driveway," he said, "and there's a light on in your office." My office. Where I keep the filing cabinet. Where I keep every document that matters. The property deed, Carolyn's life insurance settlement, my pension paperwork, the investment account records, the updated will I'd had drawn up 8 months ago. I thanked Pete and told him to stay close. Then I went back to the living room, ate 2 pieces of pumpkin pie, and waited. Let me go back, because none of this makes sense without the context, and the context had been building for about 2 years. My daughter, she's 41, works in pharmaceutical sales, married her husband 6 years ago. I liked him fine at first. He was charming in the way that certain men are charming, effortlessly and just slightly too much. His name is Warren Spence. He came from money, or at least he talked like he did, and for the first couple of years, I chalked up my discomfort to the ordinary unease of watching your daughter choose a life that doesn't include you at the center of it anymore. But then things started happening that I couldn't chalk up to anything ordinary. It started small. Warren mentioned once casually over dinner at their place in St. Vital that he thought it was a shame My house was sitting there doing nothing when the market was so strong. I smiled and said I wasn't planning to sell. He smiled back and said, of course. He just thought I might want options. My daughter nodded along like this was something they'd discussed before. A few months later, my daughter brought up the idea of a power of attorney. Just something to have in place, she said. Just in case. She'd had a form prepared. She slid it across the kitchen table like it was a birthday card. I looked at it. It was broad. It covered property, finances, decisions about care. It named her as sole decision maker with no restrictions and no requirement to consult anyone. I told her I'd think about it. I took the form home. I called my lawyer, a woman named Miss Okafor, who had handled my estate planning since 2015. She read it over and looked at me across her desk and said very calmly, Francis, do not sign this. I didn't sign it, but I also didn't tell my daughter I'd consulted a lawyer. I just said I wasn't ready, and she said she understood, and the subject was dropped. On the surface. Below the surface, things shifted. She called less. When she did call, there was a brightness in her voice that felt rehearsed. Warren started showing up at family events with a kind of studied interest in my affairs, asking about the pension, asking about the investments, asking whether I'd thought any more about the house. I started keeping notes. I don't know why. Some instinct, maybe. The same instinct that had kept me employed for 3 decades in a profession where the difference between a good estimate and a bad one was whether you'd been paying attention to the details everyone else overlooked. Then, 8 months ago, Carolyn's sister called me from Victoria. Her name is June, not in the story file, just a real name of a real woman I love like my own family, and she told me she'd heard something concerning, that my daughter had told a mutual friend that I was starting to slip, that I'd been forgetting things, getting confused, that she was worried about my capacity. I was not slipping. I was not confused. I was doing the Globe and Mail crossword every morning and managing my own finances and driving myself to medical appointments and getting regular checkups with a GP who had never once expressed concern about my cognitive function. But I understood immediately what was being constructed. A story, a paper trail, a reason, if things ever came to a formal proceeding, to question whether my decisions were really my own. I went back to Ms. Okafor. We had a longer conversation this time. I told her everything. She listened with the particular stillness of someone who has heard this story before, which I found both reassuring and deeply sad. Then she told me what we were going to do. First, I had a full cognitive assessment done at a clinic downtown. The results were documented, signed, dated, filed with my lawyer. Completely normal function across all categories. A formal record of my capacity made at my own initiative before any dispute arose. Second, I restructured how my assets were held. The house was already mine outright, paid off in 2011, and the deed was clean. But we set up additional protections. My investment accounts were restructured so that any significant transaction required dual authorization from both my lawyer and an independent financial trustee, a retired trust officer Ms. Okafor had worked with for years, not my daughter, not Warren, nobody in my family. Third, I updated my will, substantially, and I did not tell anyone. I kept showing up. Thanksgiving, Christmas, the occasional Sunday dinner. I brought wine and talked about the Jets and helped with the dishes. I let Warren talk about the housing market. I smiled. I waited. And then Thanksgiving came around and I heard my daughter's voice in the kitchen, and I understood that whatever they were planning, they decided the time had come. By 4:30 in the afternoon, I'd had enough of George's hockey analysis and pumpkin pie and my daughter's performance. I stood up, thanked them for the lovely meal, said I was tired and wanted to get home. My daughter's face went through several things in about 2 seconds. Surprise, then recalculation, then a smile that was working too hard. Are you sure? You could stay for leftovers. I'm sure, I said. Thank you. It was wonderful. Her husband, Warren, was not in the room, had not been in the room for over an hour. His absence was its own kind of answer. Pete met me outside my own house. He was standing on the sidewalk with his hands in his vest pockets, which was Pete's version of being ready for anything. He nodded once when he saw me. The lights were on in the front room now, too, not just the office. I used my key. I went in through my own front door. Warren was standing in the middle of my living room with a folder of papers in his hand and an expression on his face that moved through several phases. Surprise, recovery, a particular kind of forced calm that I had come to associate with men who were used to talking their way out of situations. "Francis," he said. "I can explain." "I'm sure you can," I said. I didn't raise my voice. I was genuinely calm. I had been thinking about this moment, or some version of it, for 8 months. "But first, I'd like to know what you're holding." He looked down at the folder like he'd forgotten it was there. "Just some documents," he said. "There's nothing." "Put them on the table," I said. He did. It was, as I suspected, a property transfer document, a form to transfer the deed of my house into a joint trust with my daughter as co-trustee and Warren as the designated administrator. It had been prepared by someone, not my lawyer, not anyone I'd ever met. There was a line for my signature at the bottom, predated 2 days earlier. There was also paper clipped to the back, a letter. It was addressed to my bank. It was signed with what appeared to be my signature. It was authorizing a transfer of $83,000 from my savings account to an account number I did not recognize. I looked at the signature for a long moment. I'd always had distinctive handwriting. Civil engineers develop it. All those years of technical drawings and site notes. The forgery wasn't terrible, but it wasn't mine. I looked up at Warren. "When did my daughter tell you I'd signed a power of attorney?" I asked. His jaw moved, she said. "She mentioned that I never signed one," I said. "Not the one she gave me, not any other. My lawyer has been aware of this situation for 8 months. So has my financial trustee. And so, since last Tuesday, has the Winnipeg Police Service Financial Crimes Unit." The folder dropped out of his hands. He didn't reach down to pick it up. I want to be honest about what that moment felt like. I'd imagined it as something satisfying, something cinematic. In reality, it was just quiet. He stood there in my living room, under the overhead light, and looked at the papers on the floor, and I watched him understand that whatever he and my daughter had constructed in their heads, whatever future they'd been building on the foundation of what they assumed was my vulnerability, was not real, had never been real. My phone rang. It was my daughter. I didn't answer. I asked Warren to leave. He left. I don't know if he called her on the way to his car or if she'd been watching the driveway on her phone somehow. I don't know what they said to each other that night, and I found I didn't need to know. What I did that evening was make tea. I sat in the kitchen, the same kitchen where Carolyn had made Sunday breakfast for 30 years, where my daughter had done homework at the table, where I'd stood the morning of the funeral and not known what to do with my hands. And I drank my tea, and I was quiet for a long time. The legal process that followed was neither quick nor simple, which is the part they never tell you in these kinds of stories. There was an investigation. There were interviews. Warren retained a lawyer immediately. My daughter initially claimed she'd had no knowledge of the forged bank authorization, which was a position that became difficult to maintain when her text messages were examined. The document preparer, someone Warren had apparently found through a contact in real estate, was a separate matter entirely. Charges were filed in the spring. Fraud over $5,000 under the criminal code. Forgery. Unauthorized use of identity documents. Warren's lawyer negotiated for a long time. My daughter's lawyer negotiated separately. They had stopped speaking to each other before negotiations concluded, which told me something about the durability of what they'd built. I did not feel vindicated. I want to be clear about that. There is a version of this story where the ending feels triumphant, and I understand why people want that version, but it is not the one I lived. What I felt, mostly, was a kind of exhausted grief, the grief of having been right about something you desperately wanted to be wrong about, the grief of a particular before and after, a line you cross and cannot uncross. I had one conversation with my daughter in a coffee shop on Portage Avenue, 3 months after the charges were filed. She cried. She said Warren had convinced her that what they were doing was technically legal, that it was a way of protecting assets that would eventually come to her anyway. She said she'd been afraid of losing the house, afraid of medical bills, afraid of what happened to families who didn't plan ahead. She said she loved me. I believe she does love me in whatever way she is capable of loving me. I believe she is also capable of loving me and making the choices she made. Both things are true. I am still working out what to do with that. What I do know is this: I did not fix my own locks without her. I hired a locksmith the next morning, a man who did not ask why I was changing every lock in the house the day after Thanksgiving. I went back to Ms. Okafor and we reviewed every document, every account, every piece of paper with my name on it, and we made sure that everything was in order and nothing was exposed that hadn't been protected already. I put a new spare key in a lockbox in my garage. The combination is not written down anywhere. Pete knows it. My daughter does not. I still do the crossword every morning. I still manage my own finances. I still drive myself to medical appointments. I am 68 years old, and I am not slipping, and I am not confused, and I know exactly where every piece of paper is in my filing cabinet, in the same house I bought with my wife in 1989, which is still my house, which still has my name on the deed, which is where I intend to stay. They thought the money was the point. It was never the money. It was the assumption that I was old enough to be outmaneuvered, frail enough to be managed, trusting enough to be taken, that because I was quiet, I wasn't watching, that because I smiled over dinner and talked about the Jets and helped with the dishes, I hadn't noticed a single thing. I noticed everything. I just didn't say so until I didn't need to.